All right, so I'm a researcher, Bridget Presley, and I'm doing a study on multi-case study of developing identities of triathlete STEM K-12 educators. So the purpose of this study is to explore how triathlete STEM K-12 educators, who I name TSKEs, develop and perform their professional identity across dual contexts, education, and competitive endurance sport, and how these identities shape pedagogy, coping, and resilience. The research questions ask, what do TSKEs identify as being important characteristics of K 12 STEM teachers? How do TSKEs identify their roles within the K 12 STEM educational community? What are the coping strategies identified by TSKEs to navigate personal, professional, and organizational stressors? And what strategies do TSKEs implement within the K 12 educational setting in triathlon? And just keep in mind that this is dealing with um, teacher identity, STEM teacher identity, not just general identity, but STEM teacher identity. So the background for this is a socio-historical, cultural, competitive timeline that maps out the origin points of the prequels to STEM, starting from the U.S. Military Academy of West Point, generating graduates who contributed to civil engineering and applied science national infrastructures, and also land grants for universities to teach technical, scientific, and agricultural education, namely connected with HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. From those points, there was a snowball effect of different military and political conflicts with different countries that spurred defense acts of education and funding to be invested in STEM teachers to strategically grow and train people who could make the US more competitive academically, scientifically, mathematically. And as the time went on, there were accountability cultural acts that followed, No Child Left Behind, and other presidential campaigns from the government to invest in education through test scores, data metrics, and teacher evaluations. After all of these different neoliberal reforms took place, the response to this was STEAM, which was the integration of arts, growing a need for more creativity, empathy, design, and interdisciplinary thinking. But with that means that the STEM identity for teachers was also affected because they now had to account for military and scientific precision. They had to account for equity and access movements, culturally responsive teaching, cross disciplinary literacy, as well as being being technicians of education to produce human capital, um, rather than pay attention to relational needs and critical pedagogical aims. All of these different shifts added new dimensions and pressures onto what it means to be a STEM educator today. So, with these came different attrition, retention issues, institutional pressures from different organizations, teachers feeling a lack of support, instructors, um, neoliberalism framings, of workforce producers that increased burnout and competitive toxic sports cultures that were starting to creep up and be embedded into the STEM community because of the fact that the US was trying to compete with other countries when it came to STEM related contexts. So the identity, stability, and epistemological alignment was compromised due to the different changes in different disciplines that were being addressed during this time. So, this is where we introduce USA Triathlon triathletes because they have quite a bit in common with STEM educators. They both experience persistence and resilience under stress. They both are goal and oriented. They both um, identify negotiations with multiple disciplines. They both experience coping strategies. They both have the risk of experiencing burnout, and they both have the risk of navigating competitive cultures for the positive and for the negative. But what's unique about STEM teachers is that they are used to physical training regimens. They are familiar with um, performance metrics under time. They are familiar with sport specific coaching as well as endurance sports culture, which speaks to a possibility of being able to experience longer retention within the STEM community than usual because of their endurance culture. The theoretical framework that I work through is STEM Teacher Identity by L. Nagdi and colleagues that basically allows for a dynamic and evolving identity shaped by personal, professional, cultural, sociopolitical, and historical experiences within the school context. This identity accounts for the teacher's sense of self, and it is shaped ongoing goal driven reflection on the interpretation and reinterpretation of experiences and intersecting identities within multi layered contexts. The power of using STEM teacher identity is that this theoretical framework accounts for the complexities and tensions epistemologically between different disciplines, as well as the overlaps between professional, personal, and socio-political dimensions that shape teachers' evolving sense of self. It attends to not only TSKEs to respond to stress, but also allows a researcher to reinterpret STEM teaching itself, what it means, who it serves, and how it can be resisted or reimagined. The epistemology and ontology of this research comes from a social constructivist and critical epistemology background that emphasizes a co-constructed pluralistic knowledge, and the ontology accounts for viewing reality as experienced through dynamic identity negotiations shaped by socio-political forces by Koyamova and Strong. The literature review of themes and terms that will be a part of this data will be STEM education pedagogical approaches. So, what type of STEM approaches were involved? Were they a one teacher teaches all, or were they a part of a collaborative group of teachers that each taught one discipline and collaborated with one another? STEAM pedagogical approaches may be the 5E model that is very well known within the state of Georgia, or it could be the TPAC model that talks about pedagogical applications of arts and knowledge and content areas. We also talk about USA Triathlon Triathlete and what type of races and regimens they engage in as a triathlete. What are the acts of resilience that they've experienced? What attrition and retention have they experienced? What type of coping strategies do they engage in to support or harm their well-being, and then what experiences with critical sport have they had to navigate while being a teacher and a racer at school. So, in order to go about this study, I'm implementing a multi-case study methodology approach, theoretical replication across bounded cases by Yen. So, I want to speak to the theory. I want to extend the current STEM identity theory, therefore using Yen as a theoretical replication design, but also taking notes and nuances from Robert Stake for the different dynamics within each case. So the goal is not to do an analytic generalization, but to see how each case within the TSKE case converges or diverges in the development of their identity. What are some commonalities? What are some differences that I could also add to the STEM identity dynamic? And most importantly, how those behaviors interact with each other across educational and athletic domains to reinforce or resist toxic resilience in STEM and sport. So, toxic resilience could look like cultural pressure to persist at all costs without regard for personal well-being, emotional health, and or ethical practices versus STEM. I'm sorry, not versus, but that could, in the context of STEM, that could be working through burnout, sacrificing creativity for scores, accepting unrealistic demands, and internalizing failure as personal weakness. Sports, in that context of toxic resilience, could be training through injury, ignoring mental health struggles, valorizing overtraining, and stigmatizing help seeking as negative. Resistance could in STEM would actually be the evidence of prioritizing authentic learning over merely teaching to the test, refusing to reduce teaching to data production, centering your teaching with the student in mind, and integrating creativity and critical inquiry with multiple epistemologies rather than reinforcing a very strict, rigid team STEM curriculum. Professional boundaries would be maintained in resistance, where you are seeking community among teachers rather than resisting through isolation. And then you're always protecting your personal identity space in within the STEM pressures. In sports, for the triathlete, it would be listening to your body. It would be valuing rest, recovery, and mental health, and not viewing it as signs of weakness. It would be choosing adaptive goal setting and enjoyment and health rather than just personal records and external validation. Speaking openly about stress and struggles, and building athlete centered, namely, I guess that parallels with student centered team cultures that prioritize holistic well being over winning at any cost. So the cases will be bounded using yin and stake with 5 criteria of who, where, when, what, and how. So the who will be triathlete STEM K-12 educators actively teaching in K-12 settings, but also actively racing within their current school year with not 3 years considered relevant, but also um, 3 races as well. So ensuring that they've been nationally ranked because they've completed 3 races by definition. Teaching in urban or rural schools in Georgia is important due to the retention stresses that are documented in literature as being the ones that require the most attention for teacher vacancies. and active STEM teaching is happening at the same time. Um, I think those are pretty much the criteria for those. Some of those could be grouped together, but we just want to tease out the different characteristics. The way that these will be sampled will be through purposeful sampling from a USA Triathlon encrypted power or password secure database. For these 4 to 6 cases that will happen, the pathway will be purposeful sampling to data triangulation through interviews, classroom, and athletic observations and artifacts, coding procedures through Corbin and Strauss, and then memo writing and thematic analysis using the literature review themes that were mentioned earlier. The ethical implications that are major here is that I am an insider within this research because I actually participate as a TSKE. So it will be very important for me to incorporate non TSKE peers and committee members to check for biases and blind spots within my interpretation of the data. Also within my interview questions. Member checking will be important, allowing for the participants to tell their own story and stay grounded to the framework as much as possible. My contributions to the field of this research will be to extend STEM teacher identity theory by integrating athletic and embodied resilience dimensions drawn from triathlon experiences to speak to retention and attrition struggles. It will bridge the critical sports science sociology with STEM education, showing how athletic coping strategies inform healthier persistence models for STEM teachers. It will also address rural and urban STEM teacher retention issues to allow for more negotiation between identity and resilience for high pressured educational settings, and enrich mathematics education research by framing teacher resilience, goal setting, and problem solving through embodied experiences, offering new ways to connect perseverance and real world application in STEM classrooms. I thank you for hearing this presentation and any feedback you'd like to share. You can contact me at bpresley4 at student.gsu.edu and just let me know your questions and feedback to keep in mind. Thank you.